Choose you this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's time for a bird video!
Or Joe Biden was lecturing them, or because some actress from Hollywood was out there telling young people to get vaccines. The reason that people would go get vaccinated right now is if they felt under serious threat, the same way that older people got vaccinated en masse because they felt under serious threat. And yet, our public policy makers, they don't have an end goal now. Right? There is no end point to this. They are now using arguments that basically argue they can limit your liberty and force you to mask up under any and all circumstances. Right? There is no limiting principle to anything they're saying right now. Because again, we surpassed that first goalpost, which was don't overwhelm the hospitals. Then we surpassed the much more important second goal, which was make sure everybody has an opportunity to vaccinate. And now it's just this kind of miasmatic, well, we might have to mask up forever because, there could be another variant. Okay, well, if there's another variant, to the rates that people die on a daily basis from, Alzheimer's disease. Is that a rationale for locking down large cities in the United States? And that's exactly what we're seeing. We are seeing the public policy folks who run our health systems are obsessed with power. This is a power grab. Again, when this was rooted in ignorance, that was one thing. When we were saying shut it all down because we don't know what this virus is going to do, that was one thing. It became clear that the lockdowns were ineffective, generally ineffective, by the middle of the summer, last year. And now we're still doing the same routine based on a threat that is not even remotely close to the threat that we were experiencing back in January, thanks to the presence of the vaccines, thank God. How disconnected is public policy from reality at this point? It's the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a recommendation yesterday that is utterly crazy. Their recommendation is that we have to start masking all the children. It is deeply important that we mask all of the kids pretty much for the rest of time. I'm not sure about dosing my kids. I have kids who are 7, 5, and 1. There are no longitudinal studies on the effect on children. Not only that, the threat to kids from COVID is not severe. If we were talking about something like polio, and if we were talking about something like even measles, mumps, rubella, that would be one thing. We are talking about a disease in COVID-19 that has killed, from 2020 through 2021, a grand total in the entire United States, where there are 75 million people under the age of 18. Remember, 75 million kids are in the United States below the age of 18. The number of kids who have died under the age of 18 from COVID-19, as of yesterday, was 335 out of 75 million. By contrast, the number of kids who had died last year and this year from pneumonia was 809. The notion that I'm going to start experimenting on my kids with non-longitudinally proven vaccinations when the risk to my children from COVID is extremely low is arguable at best. Right? I mean, that's a very arguable assessment. So the idea now is that we're going to force you to mask your kid up based on what? Based on what? If the idea is you have to protect the teachers, well, I have a way to protect the teachers. In fact, I have two ways to protect the teachers. One is that we could have the teachers wear masks if they are really upset about it, right? Get every teacher an N95, because N95s protect you. But the idea of cloth masks is they're supposed to protect everyone else from when you sneeze, but an N95 is also supposed to protect you. Or, I have an even better solution. The teachers need to vax. If the teachers are really worried about being infected by children, then they should go get the vaccinations, because it turns out the vaccinations are incredibly good. They're terrific at what they do. Instead, you have the American Academy of Pediatrics saying, I'm supposed to mask my 2-year-old or my 3-year-old based on what? The risk that they're going to get hit by lightning? Right? A risk lower than pneumonia? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's just bad public policy, and it's being pushed by all these people. Why? Because if you are in the public health situation, right? If you're a public health expert, your sole goal is to quote-unquote kill COVID. But that's not a real goal, right? It's never going to go to zero. COVID is likely to turn into something seasonal, like a weak strain of the flu, maybe like a cold eventually, we can hope. Okay, but COVID is unlikely to go away. It's just too widespread. It's not going to go away. There are millions and millions and millions of people who have already had it, who might get it again.
I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
It is not a reasonable thing to do. The fact that we are pretending it is reasonable to mask up 3-year-olds is insane. It's totally crazy. And by the way, if you're worried your 3-year-old's going to get it, get your kid an N95. Now you're going to say to yourself, wait a second, my 3-year-old isn't capable of properly wearing an N95. Right, your 3-year-old isn't capable of properly wearing a mask, period. Right, that's the whole point. It's such foolishness. LA County, by the way, here's, let me show you how bad the reporting is on this stuff. And this is from Yahoo News. LA County is now reporting more than 10,000 coronavirus cases a week, a pace not seen since March. An alarming sign of the dangers the Delta variant poses to people who have not been vaccinated and heightening pressure on health officials to reverse the trend. So, what does this mean? Okay, so, LA County, how many deaths are they having? Okay, because I know that you're talking about cases now, right? Cases are, wow, new cases. My goodness. They're seeing like 10,000 cases that are diagnosed every day. Okay, here are the number of deaths in LA County. Okay? Average. 7-day average, rolling average per day. 6. 6. The population of LA County is like 10 million people. So 6 people are dying a day in LA County of COVID. And you're talking about forcing everybody to mask in indoor places and masking up all the kids. And you're talking about this as though this is a massive crisis because LA County is seeing 10,000 coronavirus cases a week. That's 474 deaths per day. Chronic lower respiratory diseases. That'd be like 430 deaths a day. Stroke is 410 deaths per day. Alzheimer's is 332 deaths per day. And diabetes is 240 deaths per day. So why exactly am I bringing that up? Because how many deaths per day are we having in the United States right now? If you just looked at the media coverage, you would think that we were up near the top of that chart, right? Just like we were when we were at the worst of this thing, when we were averaging, we had 2-week running averages of 3,000, 4,000 deaths per day. Doubling the highest rate of death from another disease in the United States as of 2019. Now, you would think that we were up in the stratosphere, somewhere around like heart disease or cancer. No, the 7-day rolling average, as of right now, the 7-day rolling average in terms of deaths in the United States is under 300, which puts us in about the realm of Alzheimer's or diabetes. And not even of heart disease. It's like 6 times lower than the rate of death on a daily average for heart disease across the entire year. Okay, and right now we are talking about a 7-day rolling average, not across the entire year. And what does this suggest? It suggests that while we are seeing an increased number of infections, the number of deaths are not skyrocketing. And this is not a coincidence in the United States. I'm looking at the UK's chart right now because the UK started seeing the Delta variant before the United States did. Now, back in January, the UK sort of hit its height in terms of the number of cases that were being diagnosed in the UK day on day. Okay, back in January 8th, for example, they had about 68,000 new cases that had been diagnosed. Now, they're having about 50,000 new cases diagnosed every day, right? So there are some pretty high numbers there in the UK in terms of diagnosis. The difference is that if you look at the death levels, radically different. Back in January, the UK was experiencing about 600 deaths per day. Today, the UK is experiencing about 40. Like 10 times lower. More than 10 times lower. Why? Because as it turns out, the number of people who are getting this thing, who are vaccinated, are not being hospitalized and not dying, generally speaking. And the same thing holds true if you look at the statistics from Israel. Right now, what you're seeing, there's a lot of misinformation that is circulating right now about the fact that there are some breakthroughs of the Delta variant against the COVID vaccine. Again, breakthrough as far as being diagnosed with it, but not a breakthrough as far as dying from it. And this is the thing I care about. I don't care if I get the flu as long as I don't die and I don't get seriously ill from it. Why would I possibly care about that? And the only thing that makes a difference, especially in terms of government action, is the level of death. Right? If you're just talking about a bunch of people got diagnosed with the flu this year and very few people died, no one cares. We don't shut down businesses for that. We certainly don't mask up for that. Okay, so in Israel, right, which has been sort of the big headline, wow, look at Israel, Israel's so highly vaccinated, and now Israel, because politicians always have a stake in control. They do. Our health apparatus has a stake in control. They don't want to give it up. And I think what the last year proves is that Americans are willing to give up their liberty for pretty much anything. It is one thing for people to give up their liberty when there is a serious risk to them. But for people to willingly give up their liberty while they are already vaccinated against the disease is pretty messed up. And to give up your child's liberty based on pretty much nothing is even more messed up, as we'll get to. So what is the story in Israel, where there are all these headlines about how we need to shut down again? Israel has now closed travel to foreigners again through August 1st. So what exactly is happening in Israel? Well, here's what's happening. Right now, the vaccines, mostly Pfizer in Israel, are 90% plus effective against severe disease for people who are under the age of 65 in Israel. 90% plus effectiveness, which means we have now lowered the rates of death down below the flu for people who are under the age of 65. It is 80% plus effective against severe disease for people over the age of 65. So Israel right now is looking at booster shots. One of the reasons that they're looking at booster shots is because older people have immunity that tends to wane faster. But the COVID variant is still not effective against Pfizer in the sense of killing or hospitalizing tons and tons of people. It just isn't. And the reason that you're seeing some stats that are out there, again, people need to understand base rates. The reason you're seeing some stats that are out there, like, for example, in Israel, 40% of all people who are being hospitalized for COVID are people who've already had the vaccine. That's because, 75% of Israel's population has already had the vaccine. I mean, theoretically, if it were supposed to be equal, then 75% of people who are being hospitalized would have had the vaccine. But that's not what you're seeing. What you're seeing is that it is preventative of getting the disease, and it is super preventative of getting seriously ill and dying. And as it turns out, that the other thing to recall here is that when we are talking about the relative safety of populations, again, one of the reasons that you are seeing a lower level of death, even though you're seeing a spike in cases in both the United States and the UK, as well as Israel, is that one of the things that has happened here is that the people who are getting COVID are much younger. They're also not dying at the same rates as people who are 80. Because this disease, thank God, because only thank God in the sense that it would have been much, much worse if it had targeted children. But it doesn't really affect people who are younger nearly as much as it affects people who are older. Right now in the United States, about 50% of the population, somewhere in that neighborhood, is actually vaxxed in the United States. But it really matters what age you are talking about. Because if you're under the age of 12, for example, apparently about 31% of people who are aged 12 to 15 have received a dose of the vaccine. But I'm not sure, why that's a high priority. To avoid infecting people who are 65 who already should have had the vaccine? So here is the point. Everybody is treating this stuff as a crisis. It is not, in fact, a crisis. We are not at crisis levels right now. We're not. And also, we're not at crisis when everybody had the opportunity to get the vaccine. You see how the goalposts have shifted in terms of what the goals are of public policy here. At the beginning, the lockdowns and the masking recommendations, they were all designed in order to prevent overwhelming of the hospital system. Has anybody said anything remotely like that recently? That the hospital systems are on the verge of being overwhelmed? You're not hearing it. The reason you're not hearing it is because it's not happening. And the hospitals in the United States are not even close to on the verge of being overwhelmed. This is also true in the UK. This is also true in Israel. None of the hospitals in industrialized countries with high levels of vaccination are on the verge of being overwhelmed. Okay, so that rationale is out the window. That is not a reason for us not to go back to work. It's not really even a reason for us to mask at this point, especially if we're vaccinated.